Disclaimer. My work draws heavily upon the works of Carlos Castaneda. While there are few direct quotes, the underlying concepts are drawn from his work. My interpretations of those works are provided to advance my own point of view and in no way constitute a claim to anything that was not created by me. I have no commercial interest in this work. It is provided free for those who might find value in it. I have no connection with Castaneda's estate, nor with any entity, commercial or otherwise, that claims to be connected with Castaneda or with anyone connected to him. I express no opinion on the claims of those who purport to be connected with Castaneda, in the present or in the past.
Lastly, this work should not be construed as in any way condoning, supporting, encouraging, or recommending the use of any dangerous or illegal substance, or the performing of any dangerous or illegal activities. The teaching and research methods depicted in Castaneda's works should be viewed as the result of a unique convergence of time, place, and circumstance, and not as a template that any other person should attempt to follow.
Chapter 9. Part 2. 5. The value of ritual. All of the power plants involved some ritualistic activity. While the devil's weed by far required the most and the most precise ritual activity to prepare and use, mescalito and the smoke involved ritual as well. Mescalito was consumed in groups, usually at mitotes, multi-day gatherings where mescalito was consumed every night. The smoke required a trip to collect the ingredients, the same time every year, visiting the same places to find and collect ingredients. Additionally, the handling of the pipe was highly ritualized and treated like a life or death matter. To talk about the value of ritual, regarding power plants, or any ritualized behavior, for that matter, requires the introduction of another term, namely, attention. This rather lengthy meander I think will make the entire discussion of power plants clearer and more meaningful. Don Juan used the term attention on many occasions and in multiple contexts, and, as with many other concepts and terms in this arena, a precise definition is difficult to arrive at. Essentially, for Don Juan, attention is what makes the world. That is, we perceive the world around us the way we do because we give that world our attention to the world being that way. So while the world is real, it is attention that allows us to perceive that realness and to agree with everyone else that the world is the way we are all perceiving it. So, when you and I look at, say, a mountain from the same place, we may have very slight differences in what we see when we look at the mountain, and probably greater differences in what we feel about the mountain. We will both see the mountain, assuming each of us has normal or close to normal vision. We take this for granted. To Don Juan, the joint perception of the mountain is the end result of a series of miraculous and instantaneous steps. The details of this miraculous process will be discussed in later chapters. The sorcerer's shorthand for all this, as stated above, is that our attention makes the world.
However, a key point for the sorcerer is that our attention can be marshaled to assemble another reality, one just as real as the mountain that we can perceive in everyday reality. The world of everyday objects is real, it is simply not all-encompassing. The sorcerer trains him for herself to be able to perceive, and by extension, deal with, both worlds with the facility appropriate to each. Don Juan called the ability to perceive the everyday world the first attention, and the ability to perceive the additional aspects of the world, hidden from the first attention, the second attention. Footnote 6. The nagual's ultimate goal is to lead himself and his party into the third attention, a state in which one retains one's unity of personhood and perception without a physical existence on earth, and to set the apprentice nagual well on his way to achieving the same, someday. This idea will be discussed in future chapters in detail. So, our first attention is engaged at all times. It cannot be otherwise. We are continually involved in perceiving the world around us, with multiple senses, and evaluating those perceptions and deciding how to act, or whether to act, based on those perceptions. But for Don Juan, the first attention is also continually reaffirming its own perceptions. According to Don Juan, if we can stop the continuous process of telling ourselves that the world is the way it is, truly magical things can happen. Don Juan referred to this continual feedback process as the internal dialogue, and made many efforts to help Castaneda stop his internal dialogue, to quiet and eventually silence the process of continuously telling ourselves about the realness and certainty of what we see. According to Don Juan, stopping the internal dialogue is the only absolute essential for a would-be sorcerer. If one can achieve that, one can accomplish anything. I'll discuss the many ways Don Juan tried to get Castaneda to cease his internal dialogue in future chapters. For the moment I'm concerned solely with the use of ritual as it applies to power plants. The value of ritual is that it, in Don Juan's words, traps the attention. Most people will have experienced this at one time or another. A litany in a church service, for example, will often trigger a semi-detached state in the listener, or the repetition of a meditation mantra. At a certain point, our attention can become disengaged from the normal flow of internal dialogue, and then, with that stream of reassurance interrupted, we are more open to accepting the existence of, and the idea of plunging into, that other realm, the nagual. So one could look at the rituals surrounding power plants as a way of opening the apprentice up, as it were, to the possibilities of the nagual even before the power plants are actually used. But then there is the issue of necessity. Don Juan was meticulous about everything regarding power plants, especially the devil's weed. One reason certainly would be that in order to sell the power of the ritual, the practitioner must be fully invested him or herself. If Don Juan is merely selling the power of the ritual, he does an outstanding job, certainly. The level of detail and the seriousness of missteps are made very vivid in Castaneda's recounting of every experience with power plants.
Further clouding the picture is the reference, in Castaneda's last book, to all of the ritual as shamanistic nonsense. The result is a quandary about the value of ritual over and above its value as a way of softening up the apprentice for exposure to the nagual. This is a juncture where there is more personal interpretation, because I don't see enough in the record to really guide me. It's my belief, and this is more belief than anything else, that Castaneda lost his way a bit in the latter stages. I don't have anything concrete on which to say that with certainty, of course, but there are things that have led me to that conclusion. To bring them all up now would be premature. The important point for my determination of the value of ritual is that I give slightly less credence to everything that follows the power of silence. As a result, I'm not swayed overly by the shamanistic nonsense references. Secondly, while it's possible that Don Juan fabricated everything he told Castaneda, or he perfectly memorized what had been fabricated in the past and passed it down to Castaneda, it's not very likely. Don Juan comes across as supremely rational and practical, especially when dealing with matters of sorcery, so as such it's difficult to imagine him dwelling on things that were not necessary to the ritual, if they didn't have some meaning or importance. Example, the assigning of anthropomorphic qualities to the plant powers. It had no functional value for the teachings. Or, on the day that Castaneda was to use Jimson weed for the first time, Don Juan commented to Castaneda that the sunny, hot, weather was an omen that the devil's weed likes you. This again, has no bearing on any teaching point in and of itself, and is not aligned with any ritual. Third, there is a striking phenomenon regarding Castaneda's experiences with power plants, namely, that Don Juan is able to produce predictable outcomes by doing certain things in certain ways. Consider that. How could the use of so-called hallucinogens produce the exact effect one is anticipating, without some other force being at work? And, in at least one other instance, the effects encompassed other people. Castaneda had once attended a metode where a group of men took mescalito every night for 4 nights, Castaneda included. On the 4th night, Castaneda knew with certainty that the gathering would end that night, even though no one had mentioned anything to him, and, in at least one other instance, the effects encompassed other people. Castaneda had once attended a mitote where a group of men took mescalito every night for 4 nights, Castaneda included. On the 4th night, Castaneda knew with certainty that the gathering would end that night, even though no one had mentioned anything to him about it, nor had he heard it discussed. Over time Castaneda developed the theory that there had to have been a system of what he called nonverbal cueing taking place, telling participants what was going to happen, and when. To test this theory, Castaneda had Don Juan arrange for him to attend a method, without taking mescalito. In this way he could carefully observe and discern how the system of nonverbal cueing was taking place. Not surprisingly, from the standpoint of Castaneda's theory, the adventure was a bust. There was no system of cues, verbal or otherwise, to be observed. But from the standpoint of the power and designs of Mescalito, the event was a rousing, revelatory success. At one point, Castaneda felt as though a bright light was shining on him. At the same time, he noticed that all the participants had turned to look at him. Later on, Don Juan explained to Castaneda that everyone turned to look at him because they all could see that Mescalito's light was shining upon Castaneda. To Don Juan, this was further indication that Mescalito had pointed Castaneda out to him, that is, confirmation that Don Juan had picked the right apprentice. And the kicker is that Castaneda, even though not participating, knew with certainty which day was the last day of the mitote without anyone having said or done anything. All of the above leads me to think that the ritual had purpose and value over and above its value as a tool for changing the apprentice's perception. While it makes no sense to believe that certain plants harbor powers with volition, it makes less sense to me to completely deny that there is more to the universe than science and reason can capture. If our everyday world is not all-encompassing, then it is not unreasonable to postulate that what we can't perceive without breaking massive barriers might turn out to be wildly different, outlandish, and spectacular. This is the end of Chapter 9, Part 2.